When it comes to winter landscape photography, you probably think of beautiful sunrises and sunsets over snow-clad mountains. Definitely not this. The truth of the matter is, though, especially here in Yorkshire, we very rarely get those pristine photogenic winter days. Instead, we're faced with overcast drizzly skies and muddy colour palettes of browns and greys. There is one thing that we can hold on to, though. In this video, I want to share with you my top 10 tips for turning uninspiring landscapes like this into amazing photographs. We better get cracking before we get too cold and too wet. My first tip is to look out for contrast. This could be colour contrast or tonal contrast, the difference between your highlights and shadows. Especially look out for contrast between your subject and its background, because not only will it help your subject to stand out more, it will also have the effect of creating depth in your photograph. And when your eye has to work through the picture to find that depth, the more interest you create as well. My second tip is to keep things simple. Winter landscapes are often simple in their own right, with skeletal trees, strong lines and limited colour palettes, and it helps to emphasise that simplicity. Often when I go out into a winter landscape with my camera, instead of looking for specific subjects, I look at the lines, contours and shapes of the landscape. Not only will the lines help you to add to that important depth and draw people's eye through, looking at the shapes that the landscape creates takes your eye away from specific things to look for and draws your eye more to the atmosphere of the scene. Talking about simplicity, tip number 3 is to embrace negative space. Negative space is a part of your photograph where there's just nothing going on. Now, this might seem a little counterproductive. Surely we want interest in our photographs. But interest can come from a single subject placed in front of negative space. Not only will it help your subject to stand out, but it will also bring that feeling of bleakness and isolation into your scene, which I think is perfect for winter landscape photos. Tip number 4 is to look for textures and details. Now, I know we're straying slightly away from the classic landscape genre here, but hear me out. We can approach textures and details in 2 different ways. We can go for that sort of top-down view where we're creating abstract shots of patterns within a close proximity of the landscape. But if we also hit these textures and details on an angle, we can bring them into the foreground of our landscape photographs, which can add that extra element of interesting detail. Tip number 5 is to embrace mood and atmosphere. I think we can all fall into the trap sometimes of thinking that landscape photography should be the landscape seen through rose-tinted spectacles. Now, I know I'm one to talk, but sunrises, sunsets and beautiful golden hour light has its place. But sometimes I think more interesting landscape photographs are those ones that just pick up on the gritty nature of the landscape. When I'm out walking in the Yorkshire Dales, yes, I've been out on a few nice sunny days, but more often than not it's bleak and quite brooding. And being able to attach some of that feeling to our photographs is going to go a long way in creating amazing winter landscape pictures. Tip number 6, and I know you've been waiting for it, is to try black and white photography. Now, I think we've got to be careful here because black and white photography often gets a bad rap in these situations where we're trying to save a photograph that didn't really work well in colour and probably wasn't that great anyway. But I think it comes down to the choices that we make. Black and white photographs often have the effect of highlighting contrast, texture, detail and emphasising mood and atmosphere in your pictures, which, if you've been paying close attention to this video, have formulated a lot of the tips that I've been giving you so far. When it comes to going out to take black and white photographs, having these things in mind will just help you to make better decisions when you're turning pictures to black and white, because we can look for those things and work out what photographs are going to work and which are just a bit flat, boring and are not really pictures in the first place. Tip number 7 is to ignore the sky. Now, I know a sky can be a really good blank canvas for a simple negative space photograph, but if you're wanting to photograph the wider context of a landscape, then it can often get in the way. Our eyes will be always drawn to the brightest part of a picture, and if our landscape is dull and in shade, then that's always going to be the sky. So by getting rid of it in our pictures, we draw the eye downwards to the detail of the landscape itself. You can utilise walls or tracks to draw the eye through and create that depth, or maybe have various different subjects like sheep or barns in a field that act as visual stepping stones. Also, by getting rid of the sky, you can also emphasise the sense of scale of the landscape, as people think, wow, if they couldn't get the sky in, then it must be vast. Tip number 8 is to open your aperture. Now, I know this may go against everything that you've ever learned about landscape photography, because most people say for a landscape you need the foreground to the background in focus, so therefore we need to go for a narrow aperture. This might work when your scene is flooded with golden hour light and you're trying to get those layers of foreground, midground and background interest in focus. But when it comes to a dull winter day landscape, then it can also have a detrimental effect. Often I find myself widening my aperture to f2.8, f1.8, even when I'm photographing the landscape, because not only does it allow for more light to come into the picture, it also helps me to emphasise different aspects of my scene by compacting that focal plane and bringing the eye further forward in the picture. Tip number 9, hang on a minute, how many fingers have I got? My hands are so cold now I can't even feel them to count them. Tip number 9 is to go out after dark. Now, we often associate going out after dark with our camera with street scenes where we've got more light to play with, or astrophotography when of course we need a beautifully clear sky, not a dull winter's day. But no matter what the weather is, one of my favourite pastimes is going out into the landscape after dark and making it visible to the human eye through the magic of photography. Seeing this picture appear that you can't physically see in front of you is a really magical experience, and I can't recommend it enough. Tip number 10 is all about gear. Now, I know I don't talk very much about gear on this channel, but when it comes to winter landscape photography, it pays to be prepared. So when you head out, make sure that you're dressed for the conditions on the day. Also, make sure that you've got some way of protecting your camera from the elements. The last thing that you want is to head out, get some amazing winter landscape photographs, to come back with hypothermia and realise that your camera's got so wet that your photographs are no more. It can be really difficult to build up the gumption to head out and about with your camera in conditions like this in the first place. But if you do feel inclined to do so, by following the 10 tips that I've shared with you in this video, I guarantee that you'll get much better photographs. If you've enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to the Yorkshire Photo Walks YouTube channel and giving it a like. Watch this video next to hear me prattle on a bit more. I'm heading down to my car now to warm up and get dry. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.